which is simply either a solid ball used in a smoothbore weapons or a solid conical shaped projectile used in your rifled guns. These solid shots are used to batter down walls of enemy fortifications. They're used in counter battery fire, where it's hoped that the solid shot will shatter the axle or the spokes of an enemy gun, or even hit the barrel, putting a dent in the barrel that would go all the way through to the inner bore, preventing it from being loaded or fired. You then had a hollow shell that simply exploded, fragmented, if you will. Then you had two different types of scatter rounds, one known as case shot, which is a hollow projectile with small iron balls inside. So once the gun is fired, there's a fuse. And I'll tell you about fuse in just a second, but once the fuse burns down or goes off, there's a powder charge inside that hollow shell that will explode, fragmenting the shell and scattering the inner load of balls over a broad front. Then, of course, you have the famous canister round, which is simply a tin can filled with iron balls about the size of a ping pong ball. Once the gun is discharged, that tin can disintegrates, and those balls are scattered over a wide front, much like a giant shotgun. If the enemy continued charging the gun, it switched to double rounds of canister, and as any artillerist would tell you during the course of the Civil War, there was absolutely nothing that could stand in its way. When the smoke cleared, there would be nothing in your front. But you also had fuses. The smoothbore guns used a time-delayed fuse, known as a Borman fuse. There were a wide variety of them, but Bormans were the most popular. It's simply a fuse that you would screw into the ball, and on top of it is a dial with 5 numbers on it, 1 through 5, for seconds. You would judge the distance to your target, how long it would take your projectile to get there, and make a slice in the fuse accordingly, let's say 3 seconds. As a result, when you discharge the cannon, the powder charge inside the gun goes off, the ball or round is completely engulfed in flames. That flame will ignite your fuse, and as it burns around to where you made that slit, it will then go down through the fuse into the ball itself, exploding the inner charge of powder, fragmenting the ball and scattering the small iron balls inside. You also had impact fuses, but you could not use an impact fuse on a smoothbore gun, because in a smoothbore gun you have a round projectile and you have absolutely no control over how that ball lands. So an impact fuse will do you no good. You needed a time-delayed fuse on a smoothbore weapon. But on a rifled gun that fired a conical or a pointed type projectile, you can insert an impact fuse in the very nose of it. And 99% of the time, a conical shaped projectile, due to its size and the weight distribution, is going to land on its nose. As a result, you could have an impact fuse. These were highly advanced for that time period. As a result, they were not yet perfected. It is estimated that maybe only 40 to 50% of all impact fuses actually had the desired effect. If the fuse failed to go off, then your explosive round had the same effect as a solid shot. And thus many of the projectiles that are found throughout the Vicksburg Campaign area by relic hunters or by farmers plowing their fields are actually still live rounds today, and they do create quite a problem in the area. Any other questions while we're driving over to Raymond? Did that help answer your question? Very good.
This one.
Call, we are following the route of advance of General William Sherman's 15th Army Corps. His route of march will be along this stretch of the road on May the 13th of 1863. Let's go back to the day of May 12th, the day of the Battle of Raymond and the day of all these actions along the banks of 14 Mile Creek. The 17th Corps under James McPherson, on the morning of the 17th, is bivouacked in the vicinity of Utica, off to your right rear. They will follow the Utica Road into Raymond, which is on the very next ridge over to our right. When the foliage is down, you can plainly see the ridge and even spot the cars on that road. We'll see it in just a few moments. That present-day road is known as Mississippi Highway 18. Highway 18 is on the very next ridge over. You'll be able to see it here shortly. We're coming up to the Raymond-Port Gibson Road.
We'll turn left here.
We're going to turn left and go into the village of Raymond in order to utilize the restroom facilities of the courthouse. We'll then come back out that same road to the battlefield, which is just a few hundred yards to your right. During the course of the Battle of Raymond, the 1st Tennessee Confederate Infantry is positioned right here where you see this brick building to your left. And at the water tower on your left was the only Confederate battery involved in the Battle of Raymond. It's a 3-gun battery consisting of 1 Whitworth rifle and 2 smaller field pieces. On the very first discharge, the Whitworth rifle exploded and was of no further use to the Confederacy that day. That particular battery was Gibor's Missouri battery, right here at the base of where this water tower now stands. From this little knoll, they had a clear view of the bridge crossing 14 Mile Creek and could rake the road with their artillery. Now, on the day of the battle, after the Confederates are defeated, they actually stream into the village of Raymond along this very road we're now on, traveling in the same direction that we are. Following the Battle of Raymond, the townspeople went out to the field of battle, gathered up the Confederate dead, and brought them into the town cemetery for burial. In just a few moments, we will see the town cemetery on the ridge to our right. You will also see the relatively brand new headstones marking the graves of the Confederate soldiers who died in this particular battle. The village of Raymond today is a quaint little town. It's practically just a dot on the map. Were it not for the fact that Hinds Community College has their main campus here, you would never hear of Raymond. The Battle of Raymond is fought about 2 miles southwest from the courthouse.
As a bedroom community for Jackson.
That's far away.
That's only about 9 miles.
9 miles?
Yeah, it's an easy drive up Highway 18.
Here you are, folks, on the right. You'll see the town cemetery. You'll see the Confederate dead were buried in one section. You see the stones with the Confederate flag and the fence around it. Those are the Confederate soldiers, 72 of them, who died in battle here at Raymond on May the 12th of 1863. We're approaching the hill now, going up the hill into the town square. You'll see a few antebellum structures still standing today. The most notable, of course, is the Hinds County Courthouse. On the opposite side of the street, you'll see St. Mark's Church. St. Mark's Church, an antebellum structure, was utilized as a Union field hospital following the battle because the county courthouse was filled with Confederate wounded.
We'll go up to the stop sign. We'll turn. Let's go around, right? Here you see the Hinds County
Courthouse, the Hinds County Courthouse on your left. We're going to park and get out and walk around the courthouse grounds. I'll point out St. Mark's Church to you as well.
We can come back to Raymond and night on the town.
April the 26th. Well, we can get into the courthouse. Yeah, let's go. This is the mayor's house right there. Okay, we'll just stop here.
How do you feel at home?
I think he may have missed his calling. He should be on the stage. He's a great entertainer.
Not on vaudeville, though.
We are very proud of what we've been able to accomplish in Raymond with our battlefield acquisitions. I'm sure you've probably already been around out there and seen the first monument. The Austin Civil War Roundtable erected a monument to the 7th Texas.
Well, we're heading out there right after we use the restroom.
That's coming up. That's a preview. We have a lot going on here. We have an annual pilgrimage that we've established to open up some of our Civil War and antebellum houses and buildings, and that's one of the ways that we've been able to raise some of our first money for battlefield acquisition. We look forward to having groups like this come in, so I'm glad Terry spotted me over there. And I just want to welcome you to come back to Raymond, and I'll see you just in a minute over at St. Mark's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll be good. Ed Barnes always pops in, and so far he's been able to catch me in the office, so I'm looking forward to having him follow up your group. So this is what we want. We want people coming into Raymond. We love seeing these buses, and we want to welcome y'all to come back anytime. Maybe you want to get your own little tour group coming down and come down to Raymond sometime. We'll give you some Southern hospitality.
Great.
His objective is to save Vicksburg. One thing you may not be aware of, and I know McGavock and his biography points this out, and I'm sure he does it.
Inside those works,
Well, he's got to be outside the world. Realize this, he has just come from Charleston. Understand, while in command of the Department of South Carolina, the Louisville recommended the evacuation of something, claiming that it was unintended. That did not sit well with the blue blood cause in South Carolina. As a result, Confederate President Jefferson Davis had his chief military advisor, then Robert E. Lee, told him, you will defend Charleston. Street by street, miles by just from that admonition, he's transferred to Vicksburg. Once again, in his defense of Vicksburg. State of Mississippi, right?
Oh yeah?
I think somebody dropped us, spilled this off.
He's still under there.
His name appears a lot in Ed's work.
He's taking some scrapings with the penknife.
Anything?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, right here.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
When we were out at the Dillon place, I couldn't do it.
No, I couldn't do
It was
it.
What's going on out here? A party. Caucus.
Go for your head.
Watch your head.
Where's those damn yanks?
So, are did you make these installations?
Not these very ones, but similar ones, yeah.
What, and you mentioned artillery. What about grenades?
Look at the owl.
They had grenades. At the time.
This
They
is
had grenades.
This is not original.
Like 8
This original to the war.
Scared the birds away.
This is old Jeff.
Abe, the
This
war
is
owl.
old Jeff. The war.
feathers on it to help guide it in the map and ensure that it remained where it came. On the battlefield, it was just out in the distance, but it had something this area that had been drawn soldiers and out here in the
Old Jeff the war owl. We get to ring the bell too.
Oh my God, that's right.
Of course, the capital city is often
You had to go to Chattanooga to get a bell.
There's John on his courthouse cupola.
Here, let me get a picture. I got a camera.
Yeah.
Wants a picture.
This is awesome. That John Gray. I didn't ring the bell. Everybody left for lunch.
Make sure we relax the door here. Yeah. Still got it.
By around May the 10th, had discerned Grant's intention of getting astride the railroad. The railroad is still behind us here several miles. And so he would move his troops into position to try to block the federal crossings at 14 Mile Creek by taking advantage of that natural obstacle. Out on the Confederate left flank, he would place a brigade of Tennesseans and Texans under the command of Brigadier General John Gregg. Gregg had been a member of the Texas Secession Convention, a fiery secessionist, an aggressive officer. His brigade was called up from Port Hudson, Louisiana. It arrived in Jackson on May the 10th, and he was immediately ordered to take his brigade and march to Raymond. They will arrive in Raymond on the night of May the 11th and immediately move into position not far from 14 Mile Creek by advancing out the very road we are now going. Gregg will establish his headquarters at the Hinds County Courthouse, where we were just a few moments ago, and utilize the Cupola as an observation post. In arriving on town, he was told to make contact with Confederate Colonel Wirt Adams, whose cavalrymen were supposed to be operating in this area. But Adams's order simply read, "Move to Raymond, make a reconnaissance." So he did, and then he moved on and took up blocking position at Dillon's plantation there on 14 Mile Creek. Thus, when John Gregg arrives in town on the 11th, there is no Wirt Adams. When he asks the town citizens about Adams, all he gets is blank stare. So he does not have any intelligence whatsoever being provided him. The only thing he knows is there are some state troopers. And by state troopers, you're always, of course, referring to young boys and old men who weren't fit for military duty by and large, who were out on the Utica Road, and that they had reported the presence of James McPherson's 17th Corps in the vicinity of Utica. Well, on the morning of May the 12th, the 17th Corps is up in an early hour and on the road. They are screened by Union cavalry. Shortly after taking up the line of march, the Union cavalry encounters these Confederate state troops. They quickly brush them aside or push them back in their front. And as the state troopers are falling back steadily toward Raymond, they finally make communication with Gregg and inform him that there is a federal force marching out of Utica. And of course, this would be the 17th Corps, and the Battle of Raymond is not far off. We'll talk more about the approach march once we get out onto the field of battle, which is just up ahead here.
That's cool.
Free battery is here at the water tower, 3 guns. The rest of Gregg's brigade, the Tennesseans and Texans, are positioned from roughly this water tower, following along the banks of 14 Mile Creek in the same direction we're flowing. The Utica Road today is known as Highway 18. Of course, this is the road we came in on. That's the road Sherman's Corps is marching on the day after the Battle of Raymond. On the day of battle, McPherson's Corps is marching along the Utica Road, present-day Mississippi Highway 18. The modern road has changed its alignment slightly, but here we're crossing over 14 Mile Creek, a branch of it. The creek itself is in the tree line you see off to your right. That's the historic Utica Road right there. That has been property deeded by Hinds County over to the Friends organization. Here we are coming to modern Highway 18. We're turning south and we'll move out to the field of battle. As we pass by the yield sign and get on the highway, if you look off to your right, you'll see the brand new monument erected by the state of Texas, honoring General John Gregg from Texas, Colonel Hiram Granberry, and the men of the 7th Texas Infantry that fought in this immediate area. We'll be coming back to this spot in just a few moments.
Just like the
Now crossing over 14 Mile Creek. Prior to the erection of the Texas Monument, this marker on your left was the only marker out on this field of battle. You can see the pastoral setting hasn't changed much since the days of the Civil War. The Union troops will deploy in line of battle and mount their artillery on the high ground in our front, and that's where we're going to stop.
So we'll go on top of that line, George, and we'll stop and get out. Now this is a busy.
Okay, folks, again, this is how we are oriented. We are here at the village of Raymond. You recall the alignment of the forces coming up the Utica Road here. That's the 17th Corps. The 15th Corps under Sherman is coming in on the Port Gibson Road through Dillon's, and the 13th Corps is taking the Telegraph Road up here past Whitaker's Ford and Mount Moriah toward Edwards. On the night of May the 11th, let me get that on here, here we go. Here's the situation just prior to the Battle of Raymond. You can see the, okay, my maps are falling apart here from use over the years.
Oh, that Park Service better give you some things to work with.
Well, these are actually provided us by the U.S. Army, which is nice. Here you go. Here's the situation, May 11th, May 12th. Here you see the 17th Corps coming up from Utica, Sherman at Dillon's Plantation accompanied by General Grant in person, and here's McClernand's Corps pushing across 14 Mile Creek, feigning toward Edwards. Now, Pemberton has discerned Grant's intention of getting astride this railroad. He wants to block him by utilizing the only natural barrier available to him, namely 14 Mile Creek. He has called up John Gregg's brigade from the Port Hudson fortifications. You recall that Pemberton is a departmental commander, headquartered in Jackson, but responsible for the defense of both Vicksburg and Port Hudson. Thus, he can command those troops under Gardner's command at Port Hudson, and he orders Gardner to send up a brigade. He will send John Gregg and his fiery Texans and Tennesseans. They'll arrive in Jackson on the 10th by train and move out the next day, arriving here in Raymond on May the 11th. Now, knowing what Grant's intention is, he cautions General Gregg, when you arrive in Raymond, confer with Colonel Wirt Adams and get an assessment of the situation. Adams has been ordered to Raymond to scout the roads ahead of you and indicate for you where the enemy may be. He tells Gregg what his plans are. He thinks that Grant is wheeling towards the railroad. Thus, what Pemberton wants to do is have John Gregg's powerful brigade, and it's a strong brigade, about 3,000 men here in Raymond waiting for him. So as Grant's army is wheeling toward the railroad, his right flank is being presented to Gregg. The idea is for Gregg here in Raymond to find Grant's flank, hit it fast, hit it hard, roll it up in a westerly direction, drive it against the Big Black River where Pemberton will be with the bulk of his army acting as the anvil against which to crush Grant. It's a very good plan. A very good plan, but unfortunately for Pemberton, the situation itself does not exist for him to carry out those plans. And so he cautions Gregg, if you see enemy force, it is probably nothing more than a small flanking patrol. A small flanking patrol, probably screened by cavalry to disguise its weakness. With that in mind, John Gregg moves into position on the night of May 11th, morning of May 12th, south of the village of Raymond, along the banks of 14 Mile Creek. Here is the situation at Raymond. And again, this is how we are oriented. You see the village of Raymond off in the distance beyond the water tower. That water tower sits roughly here. I'm sorry, it sits roughly here. Here's the Port Gibson Road we came in on. So that water tower sits right there. We have come from the village of Raymond, past the city cemetery, out past the water tower to Highway 18, south on the Utica Road, and we are now on the high ground overlooking the valley of 14 Mile Creek, which is the dominant geographic feature of this battlefield. It flows from your right to left, flowing into ultimately the Big Black River and on to the Mississippi. What John Gregg does from his command post at the Hinds County Courthouse is order his troops to move into position along 14 Mile Creek and there await the Federal advance. He is not kept waiting very long. Early on the morning of May the 12th of 1863, James McPherson, commander of the 17th Army Corps, from his headquarters at Roach's Plantation, which by the way is still standing, he orders his troops to shoulder their rifle muskets and take up the line of march. Their destination for that day is going to be the village of Raymond. As they move up the Utica Road, this road directly behind you here, they are screened by Union cavalry. And shortly after leaving their encampment early that morning, the Union cavalrymen come up against the state troopers. They quickly push those men back in their front and steadily push them back. But as they get closer and closer and closer to the village of Raymond, they realize that Confederate resistance is starting to stiffen, which is a clear indication that there must be something behind them, namely Confederate infantry. Thus, just about a mile down the road behind us here, the Union cavalry moves off to the side. The lead brigade of infantry is deployed in the line of battle, sends forward a strong wall of skirmishers, and the advance continues. As the lead skirmishers advance onto this ridgeline where we're now standing, the whole pending field of battle spreads out in panorama fashion before them. They can see the Confederate state troopers racing down the road and back toward the village of Raymond. They are the only Confederates they can see. The rest of Gregg's brigade is concealed by the dense woods along 14 Mile Creek, where you see the road crossing on Highway 18 before us here. They cannot see the Confederates whatsoever. As a result, the skirmishers move over this hillside and down into the valley of 14 Mile Creek. The area has remained virtually unchanged since the days of the Civil War, except for the trees bordering 14 Mile Creek. Today there is a very narrow band of trees, whereas during the course of the Civil War there was probably about 100 to 200 yards of trees on either side of 14 Mile Creek. As the Federal skirmishers are advancing approaching that tree line, suddenly there's a volley of musketry from the Confederate skirmishers concealed in those woods, and Union soldiers drop to the ground, many of them killed in battle. The Battle of Raymond has begun, and no sooner does those shots ring out than suddenly there are 3 puffs of smoke coming from the water tower. Where the water tower is in the distance, the Confederate battery opens fire, announcing that battle has been joined. Immediately the Union skirmishers fall back. The lead brigade that is deployed in line of battle now ascends this rise and moves down into the valley before you, bringing on full-fledged engagement. And here you see the situation with the Union troops deployed astride the road, moving down into the valley of 14 Mile Creek. Now John Gregg initially is under the impression there's a small flanking force coming down the road. Pemberton says they'll be screened by cavalry, and sure enough there was Union cavalry, and now a brigade deploys on this ridgeline. Well, here's the flanking party. Gregg has no indication, no idea that there are additional Union troops advancing down this road. As a result, he intends to take the battle to these Federals, and he orders his troops to attack. The Confederates will attack on echelon from their left to right. The idea is to hit the Federal flank and roll it up here toward the road, then continue on with this echelon attack, driving the Federals off in a westerly direction toward the line of the Big Black River. You recall, it has not rained here in Mississippi for the first couple weeks in May. Although there was an abundance of water in Louisiana, there's a paucity of water here in Mississippi. It is very hot, it is very dry, and with thousands of soldiers moving along this road, kicking up clouds of dust, it is stifling, almost impossible to breathe. Their eyes are caked with this fine powder. As battle is joined down here in the valley before you, the thick smoke of battle, especially with Union artillery now coming into play, this valley before you will be obscured by smoke. There's an atmospheric inversion which holds the smoke low to the ground. As a result, shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, when James McPherson arrives on this very ridge near where we're standing, takes his binoculars out and scans the field, he has no idea what is in his front. But the Confederates, in similar fashion, not knowing what is in their front, launch this echelon attack. The Confederates will move from their left to right, crossing over the valley of, crossing over 14 Mile Creek and taking the battles to the Federals, as you can see. This is a very ferocious attack led by the Tennesseans out here on the left, with stiff resistance coming from the Texans at the bridge crossing itself. McPherson is knocked back on his heels by the ferocity of this attack. McPherson, not knowing what is in his front, comes to believe that he is outnumbered. As a result, he will fight a defensive engagement here during the morning hours of May 12, 1863. As this Confederate attack continues, with one brigade moving after another, way out here on the left, these Confederate forces will actually be beyond this smoke layer that is concealing the field of battle. They will cross 14 Mile Creek well off to your right, be around this smoke cloud, and be able to look up onto this ridge line. Not only do they see additional Union infantrymen moving into position and additional Union batteries extending the line along this ridge to your right, they could also see dense clouds of smoke rising from behind. A clear indication that there are additional Union forces pushing down this road. Contrary to popular belief, this is far more than a flanking patrol. There is at least one division, possibly two, marching down this road. The commander of the units out here on the Confederate left thinks this is important intelligence to relay to General Gregg. As a result, rather than continue this attack against a superior force, they pause. They will send a courier down the Gallatin Road, racing past the cemetery into the town of Raymond to report the situation to John Gregg at the courthouse. And many of us had the privilege of getting up on top of the courthouse just a few minutes ago and walk out onto the roof where John Gregg witnessed this battle from. Well, due to the dense smoke of battle obscuring the field for James McPherson, it also obscured the field from the vision of John Gregg. To get a better feel for what was going on, Gregg will leave his command post at the courthouse and ride out here to the field of battle. When the courier reaches the courthouse, there is no John Gregg. He's somewhere out on the battlefield, so that courier will have to race 2 miles back out to the field of battle and try to locate General Gregg. My point is, precious time elapses, during which time scores of additional Union troops arrive on this field of battle and extend the line to the left and to the right. And before long, the entire Confederate attack is ground to a halt, stopped by superior numbers of Union troops. Around noontime, there is a lull in the fighting as both John Gregg and James McPherson reevaluate the situation. In the eyes of John Gregg, obviously there's some more troops here than I was led to believe. How many, he's unsure. James McPherson, on the other hand, realizing that the Confederate attack is stalling, well, perhaps there aren't as many reps here as I thought there were. So there's a pause in the fighting around noon as both commanders reassess the situation. At this point in time, there are a number of Union prisoners of war, many from the 20th Ohio Infantry, for example, 81st Illinois, who are ushered into the presence of John Gregg. Gregg starts going down. These men represent almost a dozen different regiments. Almost a dozen different Union regiments. And this is his first solid evidence that, boy, there's a lot more enemy soldiers here than initially thought. There's probably an Army Corps coming down the road, and indeed there was. Rather than a small flanking party, it's a 10,000-man Army Corps that outnumbers John Gregg more than 3 to 1. Gregg realizes for the first time he is in deep trouble. About 12 o'clock, a front begins to push through this area that 2 days later, on May the 14th, will dump tremendous quantities of rain comparable to what we experienced yesterday that will flood all these streams around. But with that storm front starting to approach the Raymond area, it pushes that atmospheric inversion away, allowing the smoke and dust from this bowl in your front to begin to dissipate and rise. From his vantage point here high atop the ridgeline with his looking glass in hand, McPherson starts getting a clearer view of the field of battle before him and realizes that he has been bested all morning long by an inferior force. Thus, shortly after noon, McPherson will bring up additional troops. Crocker's division, where's our Crocker division? Crocker's division is now coming into sight behind us here. The lead brigade of Crocker's division will be deployed in line of battle. And you can see here now, shortly after noon, the extent of the Union line with additional troops still coming up the road. You can see the numeric superiority enjoyed by McPherson, and in the afternoon, he will launch a counterattack. It is McPherson's intention to apply overwhelming force not only along the entire length of the Confederate line, but hopefully extend his lines to the left and right satisfactory distance where they can outflank the Confederates by gaining the Port Gibson Road and also by gaining the Utica Road. Hopefully these flanking forces can move around Gregg, capture the village of Raymond, and bag the entire Confederate force in their front. As the Union line is being extended to the left and to the right, Gregg realizes the predicament he is in. He tries to stave off this Union flanking movement to his left, but to no avail. Confederate forces out here on the left will be overwhelmed and driven from the field, with his left flank now deteriorating, his front hard pressed, and his right flank with the 7th Texas also being hard pressed. Gregg has no recourse but to withdraw from the field of battle. And so reluctantly, late in the day, he will order his troops to yield the field. They will fall back through the village of Raymond and then off to the northeast to Mississippi Springs and on into Jackson. The Battle of Raymond is another Union victory, the second in this string of battles that will be fought before they get to Vicksburg. You recall that McPherson, this is his first test as a combat officer, his first test as a corps commander. And I submit to you, I think that he's somewhat embarrassed by the fact that he had been bested all morning long by a force less than 1/3 his total strength. As a result, that evening, when he's asked by General Grant over at Dillon's plantation to report on the day's activities, he simply says, "I was attacked by lots of Rebs, at least 2 brigades, at least 2 batteries." So he doubles the actual force in his front. And based on that faulty intelligence, Grant would decide to march on Jackson. Although there is ample daylight left after the Confederates withdraw from this field of battle, James McPherson is satisfied with the day's events. Rather than push his luck any farther, he simply occupies the town and orders his troops to police the battlefield. They will remove the Union wounded to St. Mark's Church, where we were just a few moments ago. They will bury the Union dead. They will leave the Confederate dead and wounded unattended. The following day, the townspeople will actually come out, gather in the Confederate wounded, take them to the Hinds County Courthouse, where other Confederate wounded had been during the day of battle, and they will inter the dead in the city cemetery. On the 13th, very next day, in preparation for the advance on Jackson, McPherson's corps will be ordered to march through Raymond, due north to Clinton, while Sherman's corps, arriving in Raymond on the 13th, will push through the town over to Mississippi Springs. Thus, on the night of May the 13th, you have McPherson in Clinton, Sherman in Mississippi Springs, and the capital city within their grasp. We'll talk more about the Battle of Jackson now while we eat lunch today. We're going to leave this point and go farther down onto the into the field of battle, talk more about the flanking operations, and then have some lunch here in Raymond over at what is going to be the nucleus of the Raymond Military Park that the Friends organization is developing. But before we leave here, any questions anybody would like to ask about the Battle of Raymond?
No.
Very well. Let's be careful crossing Highway 18. It is a very busy road. As mentioned, it's a 2-lane road right now. You see the amount of traffic on it. Just over the hill in the distance, it is 4-lane and solid commercial interest all the way up to the capital city of Jackson. It's just one ridge away from the battlefield.
So this is the Utica Road here.
Trying to get over to? Oh, you mean the Friends organization? Yes, they would like to get all the way to the 450 road, all the rest of the Utica road, and go back
Dissipate. That gives you the extent of the Union deployment. The Confederate counterattack came from the tree line at the far end of these open fields. 14 Mile Creek, follow the tree line in your front. It flows from right to left. So this is the scene of bloody fighting on May the 12th, right here in this area between primarily the 7th Texas Infantry, which suffers the highest loss for the Confederate Army, and the 20th Ohio Infantry, which suffers the highest loss of the Union Army. The Friends Group is currently negotiating for both of these large tracks to the left and to the right. I hope they are successful in getting them. If so, we'll have a good portion of the core area of the field of battle. Here we are crossing 14 Mile Creek, and again, the highway historical marker. Local landowner who owns this horse farm off to your right front has donated the land on which the Texas Monument now stands. We had to push it back from the road because this is all ROW for the highway. Then we had to push it back even farther because of the right-of-way for the utility company. So there you see the Texas Monument dedicated in May 2001. The first of hopefully many monuments for placement here at Raymond Battlefield. And that was all through private donations from various Civil War roundtables in Texas and the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Folks, the Friends of organization owns this land immediately to our right and the hill off to your right, known as McGavock's Hill. It's there that Colonel Randall McGavock from Tennessee was killed during the Battle of Raymond. What we are going to do is get out at this point. We'll follow the road on down. I'll try to open up the gate for us here and go up onto the hill. The Friends organization, along with one of the reenacting groups, has erected some picnic tables up there. We'll take our time walking up the hill. We'll have a picnic lunch there. While you folks are eating lunch, I'll bring up my maps. We'll talk a little bit more about the Battle of Raymond and then the Battle of Jackson that followed. Then after lunch, we'll reboard the bus and go from here. And rather than go into Jackson, as much of that field is lost, we'll head straight on over to Champion Hill Battlefield. Okay? Infantry is in position there under the command of Colonel Randall McGavock. Late in the afternoon of May 12th, as the Federals are launching their counterattack, attempting to gain the Utica Road off to your right, beyond the tree line you see in the distance there, McGavock is trying to stave off disaster by standing firm with his regiment on this bald hilltop. Seeing the Tennesseans standing firm, Union artillery from where we made our stop on Artillery Ridge started honing in on this area. Casualties began to mount at an alarming rate. To spare his men the effect of this artillery fire, McGavock, who was a former mayor of the city of Nashville, he was not well physically at the time. He was quite ill. So although it is May, he's wearing one of these great coats. Yeah. And the great coat was lined in crimson lining. And so he simply threw open his great coat like this. And that crimson lining made him stand out as a sore thumb. So rather than aim at his men, the Union artillerymen honed in on that red lining, and Randall McGavock was killed. So this hill was named in his honor, McGavock's Hill. And this is the property now owned by the Friends organization. But seeing their colonel just virtually obliterated by this artillery fire, the Tennesseans broke and fell back in that direction, and the day is lost. So the Federals would push through this area down to the Gallatin Road and into the village of Raymond.
the Battle of Raymond, another Union victory. Now John Gregg and his Confederates, they fall back through the village of Raymond to Snake Creek, just on the northeast side of the town, and there they bivouac for the night. If I may digress just a moment, an interesting thing. On the morning of the battle, May 12th, seeing Gregg's men moving out to do battle with the enemy, the townspeople were so confident that their Confederate soldiers would be victorious, they decided to throw a picnic for them and celebrate their victory. So while battle was raging 2 miles southwest of Raymond, the townspeople were baking turkeys and hams, pies and cakes, and they bring them to the courthouse square, the area where the water tower is in the heart of town, right where we reboarded our bus after visiting the courthouse. And they spread them out there on the commons. Well, sure enough, late in the afternoon, the firing stops. They're fully expecting their Confederates to come marching back into town with their banners flying high, victorious. Well, here come the Confederates down the road. Rather than in a nice, orderly fashion in splendid ranks, they're running in as a disorganized mob up the streets, hotly pursued by Federal soldiers. Well, they race right past this picnic and out the road to Mississippi Springs. The men in pursuit are soldiers from Ohio, who, seeing this picnic spread out in front of the courthouse, immediately halted pursuit and consumed all the pies and cakes. Well, pursuit goes no further from there, and Gregg's men are able to make good their escape. They bivouac for the night at Snake Creek, which is just over the next ridge from where we're now at. On the morning of May the 13th, John Gregg will disengage from the enemy altogether. He'll disconnect, if you will. And he'll fall all the way back into Jackson. There on May the 13th, rain begins to fall. Temperatures begin to drop. Arriving in the capital city that evening, after a very long, torturous train ride from Tullahoma, Tennessee, is no less an individual than General Joseph E. Johnston. Johnston has been appointed by the President, directed by Davis, to come to Mississippi and salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. Johnston does not want to come to Mississippi. Does not want to come. You recall, he had commanded the army in the east. He is a Virginian. He wants his command back that now belongs to Bobby Lee. He's sent to Tullahoma and given ostensible command over both Bragg and Pemberton, trying to coordinate the movements of these two armies, but to no avail. I'd submit to you he's not well physically yet either. He's never fully recovered from that wound he sustained at Seven Pines. But anyway, he boards the train in Tullahoma, arrives in Jackson several days later, on the night of May the 13th. He is in ill humor. He makes no reconnaissance of the area. He simply calls in John Gregg, asks Gregg what the situation is, how many men are in Jackson, what the extent of the fortifications is, what is he to expect the next day. And based on that intelligence, Johnston decides to evacuate the city without even putting up a fight. He wires the authorities in Richmond, "I am too late." And that will be the attitude under which he functions throughout the Vicksburg campaign. He has already written Vicksburg off. Keep that in mind if you will. By disconnecting with the Federals here on the 13th, John Gregg loses the opportunity to gain valuable intelligence. He will fall back into Jackson. As a result, they'll have to rely on rumors that are floating into the capital about Federal movement. Now, the rumors suggest that there are Federal soldiers in Clinton, and indeed there are. You recall on the 13th, James McPherson's corps that has fought the battle here at Raymond is instructed to move from Raymond due north to Clinton. He will occupy Clinton on the afternoon of May the 13th with his 2 divisions. Pushing through Raymond on May the 13th is the 15th Army Corps under William Sherman. Sherman has 2 of his 3 divisions with him. They will push through Raymond, go out this road right at the base of the hill here, and march on to Mississippi Springs southwest of Jackson. And so you actually have Federal soldiers. If you look at the map here, here's the capital city of Jackson. You actually have 2 divisions of Federals under McPherson in Clinton over here, 2 divisions of Federal soldiers under Sherman at Mississippi Springs down here. The only intelligence that Johnston has is that there are federal troops in Clinton, and he is led to believe that there are 4 divisions in Clinton under Sherman. And so by disconnecting on the 13th, Gregg is unable to verify this, and as a result, the Confederates will expect the attack from Clinton and be completely unaware of the fact that 2 divisions under Sherman's personal command are marching toward the capital from the southwest and Mississippi Springs. Throughout the course of the night of May the 13th, although the rain is falling, the Confederate soldiers in Jackson take up their rifle muskets and begin to evacuate the capital by marching out State Street to the north. They are also busy boxing up the state archives. The state government is busy leaving the city as rapidly as possible. Johnston decides to leave just a rear guard in Jackson to buy time to ensure the full evacuation by the Army and government. That rear guard will be under the command of John Gregg. Where's Gregg expecting the attack? From Clinton. As a result, on the morning of May the 14th, he will dispatch the bulk of his force northwest of the capital city, near where the Jackson Zoo is located today, and there be awaiting the federal attack. Down here to the southeast and elsewhere, there's just a small holding force guarding these manning these fortifications around Jackson. The Confederate evacuation is going due north up State Street. God bless you. On the morning of the 14th, sure enough, here come the Federals out of Clinton. Several miles from the capital, Gregg notices their arrival and prepares for battle. As he is preparing for battle northwest of the capital against those Federals coming from Clinton, he is shocked when a courier comes riding up from the south indicating the arrival of a very powerful Federal force coming up from the southwest. That's Sherman's 2 divisions. He realizes he's in a predicament. Fortunately, down here, this small handful of Confederates have some artillery, 18 pieces of artillery in the fortifications. They will open fire with those 18 guns, slowing down William Sherman's advance. Sherman will be forced to deploy his troops, send forward his skirmishers, bring up his own artillery, and there will be some counter-battery firing going on. Sherman, however, is very quickly convinced that this force in his front is just a token resistance. Around 10 o'clock, Sherman and McPherson are now prepared for battle. They have their troops in line, their artillery is well placed, and they're on the verge of giving the orders to advance when suddenly a tremendous rainstorm hits the area, comparable to what we experienced yesterday. In such heavy rain, you could not possibly launch an attack because you don't want to chance opening your cartridge boxes for fear that the heavy rain is going to saturate your powder. Wet powder does you no good whatsoever. The slogan of the infantrymen is always, keep your powder dry. As a result, the attack is not launched. They have to wait for a lengthy period of time until shortly before noon the rain begins to subside and finally stop. With the rain now stopped, the attack will be launched by both McPherson and by Sherman. McPherson's men will drive the Confederates back after a bayonet charge from the area around the Jackson Zoo back toward the city's main fortifications, which are not manned in this area. Sherman has a creek in his front known as Lynch Creek. Due to the heavy rains, this creek is bank full. It is unfordable. There is a bridge across the creek. The Confederates were unable to destroy it. So what they did is they removed some of the boards. And so the Federal troops, although in line of battle here, will have to move down to the creek, break ranks, cross on the stringers of the bridge, and then reform on the other side. Once they have reformed on the other side, then Sherman will launch his main attack. By the time the main attack is launched by Sherman, McPherson's men have overwhelmed the Confederates out here northwest of town and are driving hard toward the capital city. McPherson's troops will be the first to arrive at the State House, followed very shortly thereafter by General Sherman's command. The Battle of Jackson is over in just a matter of hours. It is another Union victory. Sherman, McPherson, and Grant will all go down to the State House, watch as the stars and bars are lowered to be replaced by the stars and stripes as a sign of victory. Jackson, Mississippi becomes the third southern capital to fall to federal forces. The first two, of course, being Baton Rouge and Nashville. Jackson now falls into federal hands. By gaining control of Jackson, this is not Grant's objective. He does not want to occupy the capital city. His objective is Vicksburg, simply to avoid the need for occupation of the capital city. Grant decides to neutralize the city, if you will, militarily by applying the torch. Anything of military value is destroyed. Machine shops and factories are set afire, telegraph lines are cut, railroad tracks are torn up. During the course of this destruction of public property and war-making capabilities of the capital city, Sherman and Grant went into a factory that was being run by women and producing tonnage and canvas for the Confederacy. As this canvas is coming out of the looms, it stamps CSA. Well, the two generals watched these women work for just a matter of moments when finally Grant turns to Sherman and says, "I think they've done enough work for today." Sherman got the message and he ordered the women out of the factory, saying they could carry as much cloth as they could, and once they left the building, they set it on fire. But you recall a storm is pushing through the area. Although the rain has stopped, as we have seen, the rain stopped here early this morning, it's still quite windy, isn't it? Well, the winds following this rain would fan the flames that was consuming the factories and the machine shops and so on, blowing sparks from commercial buildings and industrial complexes into residential areas. And much of Jackson would go up in flames. But again, the intentional burning is purely for military reasons, anything of military value. Now, although much of the residential areas were destroyed, and as a result, Jackson to this date has the nickname of Chimneyville, to highlight the fact that this burning was not an intentional burning of the residential areas, I point out to folks the fact that the State House is still standing, in which the ordinance of secession was passed. The governor's mansion is still standing. It is the second longest occupied governor's mansion in the United States. The City Hall, which was standing during the Civil War, is still City Hall today. So there's quite a number of public governmental buildings from the Civil War that are still standing and in use today. Surely if they were going to destroy Jackson for the sake of destruction, they would have destroyed all these symbols of the secessionist government. So Jackson falls to federal hands on the 14th. Johnston's forces that are descending on the capital city from the south, coming up from Port Hudson, from the east coming all the way from the Atlantic seaboard, and coming down from the northeast from Tennessee, these forces will be scattered to the four winds. They will not be able to concentrate at this time. So they are scattered to the four winds. With Jackson now neutralized and all relief forces that are moving toward Jackson now scattered, Grant feels confident with his rear being secured, and he'll turn his army west toward his objective, Vicksburg. And en route between Jackson and Vicksburg, he will fight two more engagements, this time with the field army personally commanded by General John Pemberton, the battles of Champion Hill and Big Black River Bridge, and that's where we are going now. So before we leave this site, any questions about the battles of Raymond or Jackson? Yes, sir.
Well, I guess thinking about what's going on in the east right now, Chancellorsville is...
Of course, in the east, the Battle of Chancellorsville has just been fought.
Yeah.
It won't be until June 3rd that the Gettysburg Campaign begins.
You think that the, you know, with Johnston not being able to do anything here, do you think that that pushed Richmond to a point to say to Lee, you know, we've got to turn this thing around, we've got to end this war, let's attack Washington the best way you can and see if we can get European people to start recognizing this?
I don't think that influenced Richmond at all. You'll recall that the impetus behind the Gettysburg Campaign is Robert E. Lee himself, not Jefferson Davis. Davis was very much opposed to it initially, but Lee kept badgering him and pushing the point this would be the best solution. And Davis, who had a healthy respect for Lee, gave them the go-ahead.
So Vicksburg and what's happening here, the fact that Jackson's lost and Johnston says we can't do anything here, that didn't have any influence on Lee moving into the north?
I think it may have some influence on Lee. Now, Lee is not aware of Johnston's telegram, "I am too late." He does know by June the 3rd that Vicksburg is besieged. Now, of course, he starts thinking of the Gettysburg Campaign long before he actually launches it. Vicksburg would come into play only late in his rationale. Because after the battle at Chancellorsville, Lee begins to think, this is my chance now, with this victory behind me, to go ahead and invade the north. It still is several weeks off before Vicksburg is actually besieged, but the situation is clearly growing worse.
How did McPherson get north of Sherman? I thought he was below him, coming up through here.
How did McPherson get north of Sherman? You recall, after the Battle of Raymond,
right.
The very next day, May 13th, Grant will instruct McPherson to march due north to Clinton. Sherman will cut below him, if you will, and go off to the northeast toward Mississippi Spring, and then both converge on Jackson like that.
And McPherson's misrepresentation actually was to Grant's benefit.
In hindsight, yes. In hindsight, yes.
Because
had it not worked to Grant's benefit, and Grant found out about his misrepresentation, I assure you that something else would have happened.